Welcome to the Circular Economy Show podcast from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. In this series of episodes, we're looking at the fundamentals of what we mean by circular economy, how it works, and share some examples of it in action. We are revisiting 3 of our most popular episodes, featuring conversations between our founder, Ellen MacArthur, and Joe Iles, the Foundation's circular design lead. If you missed the first part of this series, I highly recommend you go back to that and listen to hear about the basics of a circular economy. So in this episode, Ellen and Joe discuss different parts of a circular economy, both biological and technical. You might already be familiar with the circular economy system diagram, known as the butterfly diagram, which shows the continuous flow of materials in a circular economy. If you haven't seen it before, you can find a link to it in the show notes below. Ellen and Joe will look at the loops within the system, including technical processes such as reuse and repair, as well as exploring how the economy can regenerate nature. Let's start with a recap from Ellen about how a circular economy differs from the current linear system.
You best describe the way the economy works by looking at how it is today. So today we take a material out of the ground, we make something out of it, and then at the end of the life of that product, in the majority of cases, it gets thrown away. And you could call that a linear system or a linear economy. Now, when you take it to a circular economy, from the outset, you design the system so it works differently. So when you design a product, the product cycles, so it sits within the system for as long as possible. The materials within it sit at their highest value for as long as possible. You design out waste and pollution, because why would you ever create waste? And you also regenerate natural systems. And when you think about the biological materials, the stuff that rots or biodegrades in our economy, you would design the system so that can be recovered, captured, and fed back into the system to be able to regenerate the system.
What about the economy part of that? Why is it the circular economy rather than circular products or something like that?
The economy is what we all live within. We all live within an economy. It's how money flows within a system, but it's much, much broader than that. You know, the very nature of the way our economy works is actually quite challenging. You know, we've had the Industrial Revolution. There weren't many of us around. Now things have just grown and exploded. We have more people. We have more use of resources. We have a culture really that takes many, many, many more materials much, much more quickly. And in that linear system where you take it, you make it, and you throw it, we're just kind of using this stuff up faster and faster. So if you change the whole system, you could call that a circular economy.
So it's about not just, even if we're thinking about products and materials, it's not just about one product, but about all the different systems that we use to create them and use them, all working together.
I mean, it's everything from the design of the product, what sits within it, whether you can recover the materials at the end of the product's life. It's how the product sits within the system that then enables it to be recoverable, so it can come back to the person who made it or understands what's in it to get those materials out. And it's also the biological materials that sit within the system. So, you know, food waste isn't really a product, but valorising that and keeping it within the system is absolutely vital. So it's looking at that whole big picture of everything that flows right across the world, you know, really from a materials backbone, technical in the form of plastics and metals, and biological in the form of, you know, it could be cotton, it could be timber, it could be food waste, it could be anything that physically biodegrades.
And I think something that for me was a bit of a kind of breakthrough in understanding that topic is this idea of use versus consumption. So we frequently talk about consuming stuff, which is associated with that straight line model that you just described. Actually, we don't consume most things. We consume
just
food. Yeah. And I think I heard someone say once, if you didn't eat it, you didn't really consume it. So which suggests that there's a huge potential in shifting from that straight line to the circle, because most things could keep going around in a loop.
Absolutely. I mean, even food waste, human waste can cycle. You know, there's still value in that, you know, what comes out of us. You can still fit that within a system. But yeah, that basic kind of notion of consumption implies that we all consume stuff, and we don't. As you say, we don't at all.
When we talk about linear to circular, from a straight line to a circle, we make this circular economy idea sound really simple. And one of the things that appeals to me is that in essence it is, and you described that very well. But within that concept, there are a number of different aspects, and it'd be good to just run through some of those now and talk about how they fit together, really. You've spoken about it as a system. Let's talk about some of those different aspects of the system. And one of the first things that I learned about circular economy is this idea of it being made of 2 different types of material, technical and biological. So firstly, technical. What is the technical cycle?
Technical cycle is basically anything that doesn't biodegrade. So it would be metals, rare earth metals, most plastics, polymers, things that you would want to recover within a circular economy and feed back into the system. It could be through recycling, that could be chemical recycling, it could be physical recycling, anything that doesn't biodegrade. And the biological cycle is the side of the circular economy that would biodegrade. Now, you could think of that as being, food or wood, but it's very, very broad. It could be cotton. It could be a form of wood which is chipboard. It could be anything that, if it's designed correctly, which is also very important, would physically biodegrade and return to the soil.
And pretty much everything we use, and I would challenge people to kind of look around them and think, most things fit into those categories, or everything fits into that category, really.
Yeah. And it's very important to distinguish between the two, because the technical materials you want to recover and feed back into the economy. You can't let those lie on the ground and disappear, because they won't, apart from perhaps some metals will eventually rust away. But they're very valuable. The biological cycle is valuable in a different way, because it's biological material which for billions of years has been returning to the earth and regenerating soil. And actually, we've kind of broken that cycle with timber, with cotton, with food waste, with human waste. We're not returning that to the soil and regenerating cycles. So you think of those two, technical and biological cycles.
And today one of the problems is we mix those things up.
We mix them up all the time.
We combine biological materials with technical materials in ways that they can't be separated.
And clothing would be a great example with a polycotton. We can't recover those two different fibres.
So that's a textile that's made of some synthetic stuff and some biological.
Yeah, all woven together, yeah.
Okay, you mentioned recycling. It's something that people are really familiar with. Most people have made efforts, whether it's in their own home or in their office, to try and be better at recycling. How is it part of circular economy?
Well, recycling really, yes, you want to do it, absolutely. Of course, we want to get the materials and feed them back into the system. But it's almost the loop of last resort. So yes, we want to recycle, and packaging would be an example of a very high volume, low value material that you would want to design to be 100% recyclable if it were plastic, for example. But then you also have these other products that sit in a different space where you want to keep them as the product for as long as possible.
I think a breakthrough moment for me on the recycling topic was around when someone described, take the phone example, how you might hear from some businesses, whether it's phones or other products, that they want to collect it to effectively chop it up and reuse its materials again, which is for some people is a place to start on circular economy. It gets their foot in the door maybe, but you're losing all the value that you added to those materials in the first place by putting them together, the energy from people or machines that went into assembling something like a phone, the effort that went into effectively like marketing it and shipping it, getting out into someone's hands. So you're really stripping that away if you return something to the raw materials that it's made of.
Yeah, without question, the most value is in the phone itself. And any way you can keep that phone at its highest value for as long as possible, that would be the best option, profitability-wise, actually, from a company perspective, as well as from a broader systemic perspective. But I think also the components have value. So it's not just a phone as a phone, but it's the components within the phone that have value. More value than the materials that sit within those components. So you almost go through these loops of, the most value is the phone as a phone. Then the next loop of value would be the components. And you, of course, you can't make a phone that's going to be, technically at the top of its game for 10 years, probably not even 5 years, and often not even 3 years. But you can design it so that when it stops being serviceable as a phone, you can then recover those materials. So the most value lies in the phone and the remanufacture, resale, decomponentization, but ultimately you definitely want to be able to recover those materials and recycle them.
So in essence, if you have to make something again, that surely takes more money, energy.
Absolutely. And I think a great example of that is remanufactured engines.
Well, let's go on to remanufacturing then, seeing as it's one of your favourite topics, I know. You've been around some remanufacturing plants over the years. How is this part of circular economy?
Well, if you think about making an engine, for example, that engine is a phenomenal piece of equipment that's had millions of hours of R&D put into it, and it works. Most remanufactured engines today have actually broken. They come into a factory having been broken, they get completely stripped down, ultrasonically cleaned, and then the majority of the parts get reassembled into a new engine. About 80% of the original parts are in the new engine, the remanufactured engine. 20% will be replacement parts. But that engine then has 80% less energy and 80% less material in it compared to a new one. So you're saving so much money and resource through keeping it in the system. Now, that's a broken engine. If you can predict when an engine's about to break and then remanufacture it before it breaks, you'll be changing much, much, much smaller parts. And if you design it for that, then it'll be a much cleverer system.
So with things like engines, heavy, expensive components, it makes sense. Are we seeing it break out of machinery? Are there other areas where remanufacturing is going to take off?
I think remanufacturing is something that's definitely going to grow, and I think it's the dependency of raw manufacturing from raw materials on energy and materials is huge. When you look at remanufacturing, you already have the constituent parts, you already have the item, you already have the R&D. It's not to say that that engine will keep in use for the next 30, 40, 50 years, because new technology will come in, we'll probably no longer have combustion engines. But if you design it to be remanufacturable, if you design it so you can decomponentize it, if you design it so it comes back to you, you can get everything out and turn it into the next engine of the future.
From remanufacturing, what about things like repair and maintenance? Are they the next level up?
Well, repair and maintenance keep things in use at their highest level. If you can catch something before it breaks, that would clearly be the right thing to do before you have a catastrophic failure that needs a remanufacture of that engine, for example. So, yes, repair is absolutely part of a circular economy. That could be a phone, it could be a car, it could be clothing. How can you keep that thing that's been made with the energy and materials in it in use for as long as possible?
And if you can repair it where it is, that's without shipping it back to. I mean, I've certainly had products where they've said, we offer a repair service, or you can get this repaired, but you need to send it halfway around the world to some centre where they will do that kind of centrally. But we're seeing now people empowered to repair things in their own home or with more local phone repair people or other kind of crafts or tradespeople that will do that kind of in situ.
It's definitely a growing industry. Several times I've repaired my phone, taken it apart, followed the instructions. It takes a couple of hours, but actually by the time you've gone off and taken the phone somewhere and paid someone else to do it and gone back and collected it and not had your phone for a while, it's actually quite inconvenient. And I think there are people who would love to fix it themselves. There are other people who absolutely don't want to do that. So there are different options, but it's great to see this space growing.
And then lastly on this technical cycle, sharing is part of the picture. And it could be related to some of the other loops that we just mentioned, but we're seeing more people share the products that they own.
Well, if you think about a power drill, most people have one in their home, but most people hardly ever use it. And it's generally not a very high quality drill, and it will probably break when you've used it just a few times because it's bottom end of the market.
And you say that because people, if they know they're not going to use something very much,
they don't buy high quality.
They buy the low quality one just because it's a necessity.
It's a necessity, and I think there is a shift, particularly in built-up areas. When we have cities and more people in a concentrated area, you don't have to go far to borrow things. You don't have to go far to share things, and you can take that to the next level with China, with Y Closet. You effectively lease your clothes. You're sharing your clothes with other people, but you don't think of it like that. You're leasing them. You're having this phenomenal box of great clothes delivered to your home, and then off it goes. And so sharing doesn't just have to be between you and your neighbour or you and someone down the road. It can actually be done in a much more sophisticated manner.
So that's the technical cycle, things like repair, remanufacturing, recycling. What about the biological cycle? Because the routes are going to be quite different if we want to make use of all the materials and value within that cycle. You can't rent or repair a sandwich.
Not really. But if you think of the principles, they're very similar. So technical products, keep them in use for as long as possible. Think about this building. This is timber. This has been in use since the 1500s. This is being kept at a very high quality because it's doing a very important job. That could have been burnt in the 1500s and then it would have been very low quality very quickly, albeit doing a useful job. So if you think about applying that to today's economy, a piece of timber could be burnt, which we do in many countries, or that piece of timber could be made into a table, At the end of the life of that table, the table could be broken down and turned into particle board. At the end of the life of that particle board, it could be broken down and it could turn into compost if it was intelligently designed. So think about what we call cascading. How can you use the item you have for as long as possible? It could be said for cotton. You could make a T-shirt. That T-shirt could become wadding or stuffing or padding or sound insulation. And then eventually, if it's non-toxic, organic and biodegradable, it could feed back into that biological system. So it's not just the biodegradable things we think of, like food waste or human waste or leaves from trees. It's also the bigger things, these things and the fibres. How can we keep those in use for as long as possible? How can we keep them at the highest value?
And you've just described throughout that process, not just one person or business making use of a resource, but potentially many more stages beyond that. And it's interesting to think about how a whole economy would work if there were many, many more opportunities for small and large businesses or individuals to make use of the things that are either coming out of the ground or that are being grown.
So many loops, so many innovations, and a different way of thinking. If you put a toxic ink on a piece of paper when you print it, then actually you can't really recycle that paper and turn it into, a packet of a cereal box, for example. So think about how you design. Think about what system you're designing for. If it's the biological system, make it biodegradable, make it have value.
And on the biological cycle, people often talk about things being regenerative or regenerating natural systems. What do we mean by regenerative, and why is it such an important part of that biological story?
I see, regeneration as an opportunity. We've been so extractive and so consumptive for so many years. We talk about, 60 harvests left before topsoil degradation means we can't really grow anything in the way we do today. I mean, that's quite critical. But if you can collect all the biological material, the human waste, the food production waste, and feed that back into the system, you have the ability to regenerate it. You can actually leave it better than it was when you found it, which in today's world is a phenomenal opportunity. We're so used to thinking, let's just make this last a bit longer, let's eke out what we've got a bit longer. But this is a completely different way of thinking. Let's actually make it better. Let's regenerate it. Let's make it richer. Let's make it hold more water. Let's make it better land.
It's that flipped perception from how can we just minimise the negative impacts to how can we
build something better.
To have a positive impact with all the different activities that are going on in the economy every day.
Absolutely. It's a completely different mindset.
From mobile phones to sandwiches, we've heard how circular economy principles, driven by design, involve eliminating waste and pollution, circulating products and materials at their highest value, and regenerating nature. So we're coming to the end of this 3-part series, and in the next episode, Ellen will take a closer look at the role of design in a circular economy. In that episode, we'll see lots of examples of who is already doing it and how you might be able to get started with it too. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you want to hear more from the Circular Economy Show podcast, make sure to follow or subscribe. It also really helps us if you leave a review if you like what you hear. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.